Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the Trails to Wellness Coping with Anxiety Group Information and Education session. We appreciate you all being here. We know how busy life can be, and we just appreciate you taking the time to hear what we have to say, and we hope all of the information will be helpful to you and your family. We like to always start with a land acknowledgement. We just think it's so important that we always remember, the original people who were on the land that we now are. It's also important that we remember that land acknowledgements don't suggest that, there's a historical context to colonialism. It's something that's happening here and now. And so it's important that we're mindful about our role in it. So we here in the Durham region respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional islands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. So this is me. My name's Kim Sundell. I'm one of the social workers here with Durham Catholic. I've been here for over 10 years. I've worked in a number of schools, elementary and secondary, within the board. I have worked with children and teens and families on the topic of anxiety for many, many years, both here at the board and outside in the community. And running the anxiety group is a bit of a passion for me. I really appreciate the chance to help kids understand what's happening in their bodies and understand anxiety and how they can learn to manage it. The agenda for tonight. So I'm hoping to give you lots of information about anxiety and sensitivity in children, some strategies and ideas about how to support your child's mental health. Obviously, part of the reason why you're here, lots of information about Trails to Wellness and some of the next steps. And then also resources. There are lots of great resources out there. And so I'll spend some time sharing some of my favorites with you. So Keys to Parenting Your Anxious Child, you'll see the book there. We use lots of material from this book to build this presentation. We really like the way the book is written. It's very easy to understand, some very good, important tips. The book is no longer in print, but it was written by Dr. Katerina Manasas. So she is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. She worked with Hospital for Sick Children, also University of Toronto, and she is retired now, but she did have a private practice here in the Durham region, and so we worked closely with her. So you can see her website there, although the book's not in print. She does have a PDF version available on her website that you can download and look at. Also, we wanted to highlight Anxiety Canada. We use a lot of information and resources from them as well. It's an excellent website. Lots of worksheets, handouts, practical tips for parents, practical tips for kids and teens. There's also the Managing Anxiety Plan, which is a really special resource. It's CBT based, which we're going to talk about a bit later, but basically it provides week by week intervention sessions, information that parents can do together with their kids at home. So it will start out each week with some information for parents about how to understand what they're talking about with their child, how to explain it to them, and then also an activity to do together. So it's phenomenal. Okay, so we wanted to start with this video. The person in the video you'll see is Dr. Katerina Manasas, but this video was written for teachers. And so we wanted to give you a sense of, what we share with teachers, how we talk with teachers about anxiety in their classroom and for their students. And she also kind of touches on some of the main points that are important to remember when we're thinking about anxiety in our kids.
Anxiety is an exaggerated fear response, which means becoming fearful in a situation that's not truly dangerous. And usually with that fear response, we experience it in our bodies. We find our hearts racing, find ourselves sweaty, find ourselves breathing quickly, all of those stress responses in the body. We also find that it affects how we think. So we worry more and think about the worst, most catastrophic outcome of things. And we experience it behaviorally. So we tend to avoid the things that we're anxious about. Well, as a clinician, what we look at is we recognize that everyone gets anxious from time to time, and a certain amount of anxiety is normative. But where we start to consider it an anxiety disorder is when it's interfering in day-to-day life. And there's about 3 types of disorders that are really common in kids. One is separation anxiety, where the child is afraid of being away from their parents, even for short periods of time. A second is generalized anxiety, where a child worries a great deal or asks for reassurance a great deal, and can also have things like tummy aches or difficulty sleeping because they're tense all the time. And then the third is social anxiety, where these children are exquisitely sensitive to embarrassment, and so they avoid situations that might result in embarrassment. The purpose of anxiety is it goes way back to the caveman days when people had to run from wild animals and other dangers, and it was adaptive to be very sensitive to cues of danger. So some people developed an exquisitely sensitive response to danger, which is now a little bit excessive, and that's how we believe anxiety originated. Really gradually, year by year. And what tends to happen is the sensitive child, the child that's predisposed to anxiety, in an ideal world, their parents express confidence that they can face their fears, and they're encouraged, and they do go out and they face the things they're afraid of, and the anxiety diminishes. But sometimes parents are not able to do that, and so the anxiety persists, and sometimes other experiences heighten the anxiety further. So a lot of changes, for example, can heighten anxiety. Sometimes normative changes, like moving from one house to another, or starting school, or having a family breakdown. I mean, all of those can certainly heighten anxiety, as well as some truly traumatic events, serious accidents, crimes, things like that. Anxiety can impact students in every aspect of their school life. It can make it difficult to attend school, particularly with separation anxiety, but some of the others as well. It can make it difficult to participate in class. If you can imagine putting up your hand to answer a question, that's risking embarrassment every single time. So for socially anxious kids, that's really difficult. Presentations are terrible for them as well. Working in groups can be difficult for kids who have, again, anxiety about how their peers are going to respond to them. And test taking can be terrible for kids who worry. They can freeze up on tests, or they can become overwhelmed with assignments that are a little bit bigger. So any of those are really common manifestations of anxiety in school-age children. Knowing the situations they are anxious about and gathering that information from the child and the parents both, and then helping them to face that situation gradually with lots of positives for doing so. So, for example, if someone is anxious about large assignments, then you break it into small chunks and give them positives every time they complete a chunk. If someone is anxious about presentations, then you might allow them to present one-to-one with a teacher at first, before they're more comfortable presenting in front of a group. So trying to create those small stepping stones towards dealing with the feared situation, and then providing lots of positives for doing so. I hope that this type of education can avoid making anxiety worse for those who are predisposed, and can also encourage teachers to work constructively with students and parents and professionals if needed around the students who have more significant issues.
Always some huge takeaways for me when I watch that. One is, I mean, she talks about so much, but remembering that there is a root to anxiety so many years ago, and knowing that it is a normal reaction. Just when it's excessive, it can be trouble for someone. And also the idea that helping students is really by helping them face their fear, not letting them avoid it, but letting them face it. And that's an important concept that we'll talk about a little bit later. So anxiety issues among children and youth, we know it's one of the most common forms of psychological distress. It's one of the most common mental health needs that students talk about. We know that it affects 1 in 10 school-aged youth. So, in every classroom, there is at least one or more students who have feelings of anxiety or may even have a diagnosis of anxiety. And we know that it can interfere with children in their school life, so in their academics, their relationships with others, and lots of different situations in their life. So Dr. Manassas kind of focused on this, but there's common types of anxiety disorders. So separation anxiety, when students, kids are not able to separate from their parents. This can happen, after the weekend, after March break, after the summer. It is normal for kids to be anxious about separating at some of these pivotal points. But again, it's the amount, the level of distress that's a bit more than expected. Specific phobias. So this is where kids may have specific fears around something like dogs, bugs, peanut butter, and those things really, really, no matter what you do, no matter how you expose them, no matter how you try and help them see that that's not a scary thing, they just can't get past it. Social anxiety, where kids are really worried about judgment, being judged by others, making mistakes, not reaching up to people's potential or their own potential for themselves. A lot of students have social anxiety who struggle in that way, and generalized anxiety, the child who just worries about everything from storms to whether you'll be home on time, to whether there's a robber outside. Just they really worry about, every possible thing they can find. Lots of changes that you'll notice in kids who are struggling with anxiety. So changes in their affect, or what you might see on their face, crying, lots of flushed cheeks, shaking. You might notice a change in dependence. You may notice that although they used to be a bit more independent, now they're more dependent on you to go from maybe level to level in the house, or to pack their backpack for school. Behavior, obviously you may see some refusal to do things that they used to be able to do, some change in behavior with anxiety, anger, sadness. Really, it's noticing some of these things in excess and that they're extreme. So more than should be expected for that situation. You may notice cognition, so some thoughts that they might describe to you or may be able to tell you about, and then functioning, being able to do some of the things in their life like activities, attending school, birthday parties, things that they used to be able to do much more easily, then they start to struggle with them. This slide is always really important because a lot of times what we think is one thing could actually be anxiety. So sometimes kids who are very defiant or refusing to do things, we may think that's a non-compliance or a behavior issue, when really it's them trying to avoid an anxiety-provoking event and really avoiding it huge to make sure they don't have to do it. Sometimes we see kids who really have a need for control with their peers, with the routines in their family. And a lot of times that could be an attempt to manage anxiety. We know when kids are feeling out of control, it really helps them to have control over some of the things that they can. ADHD type behaviors, so really fidgety, restless, unable to sit still. A lot of times this is also a symptom of anxiety and some of the changes in the body that just make it difficult to be relaxed and to sit still. And then physical complaints, stomach aches, headaches. A lot of times people may worry about whether their child has the flu or is sick in some way. And of course, we always say, if you're worried about that, check with your doctor. But if it's a regular pattern and it always seems to happen the night before school on a Sunday night, that could be a signal that your child is struggling with some anxiety. So here's another video that we show teachers. It's really focused on the difference between adaptive and problematic anxiety.
Anxiety, like any mental health disorder, occurs on a continuum. So we see things that get into a mild camp or a moderate problematic camp, and then there's the severe camp. So naturally, there's some things in school, and a good deal about school and learning things that you don't know a lot about cause us to be nervous, and that's normal. And we want students to understand that that's the normal part of growing up. It's normal for them, and it's normal for us as educators and as mental health support people supporting their learning. So it's normal to be nervous about speaking in class, or sometimes we ask students to read aloud in class or answer a question in front of the whole class. It's normal to be anxious about those things or a little bit nervous. Where we get into sort of the moderate range is where we start to see a little bit of avoidance, where whenever we have to read out loud, we're going to the bathroom or we're sharpening a pencil. So we're trying to avoid those things rather than work through them and get beyond them on the other side. Things that are in the severe area in terms of anxiety are where the anxious symptomatology gets in the way of someone's emotional, daily functioning, academic achievement, that kind of thing, gets in the way of social functioning with other children, with other classmates. And when we see those kinds of functional impairments happening, we know that something is really problematic and might need some more attention or intervention.
So anxiety is totally normal, but we just need to watch for when it's becoming a barrier for students. One of the things that we try to focus on when we're figuring out whether there's a reason to be concerned is what you see on this slide here. So we call this the 4 Ds. So if you see a change in the disproportion, so the intensity, so how strong someone's feeling something or how often they're feeling it is different, that could be a reason to be concerned. Duration, so normal for people to be anxious around certain things, but just doesn't go away as expected. So normal first day of school to be nervous, but if a month later they're still not adjusting and reporting lots of anxiety, that could be a reason to be concerned. Disruption, obviously how much of their life it's getting in the way of. And knowing that there are certain activities that kids want to do and need to do. And if they're not able to do those, that could be a reason to be concerned. And then distress. So the level of distress that you see. A little bit of upset makes sense. A lot of upset over something that you might think is a bit simple or basic is probably a reason to wonder. So when is anxiety a problem? If there are ongoing complaints of a stomach ache or other physical concerns, if you notice that your child is struggling to fall asleep or has trouble staying asleep, if they're crying or having a difficult time after breaks in school, so summer, March break, weekends, if you notice that they're avoiding being with friends, isolating themselves a bit, avoiding joining in on activities at school or outside of school, if you see an emotional response that you think is excessive to the situation, or they're refusing to go to school for no reason, that is known to you or known to the school. Here's a quick video for you. This video is for teenagers, but we have one that's for children that we show in our group. And it's really just an amazing summary of what happens to our body when we're struggling or when we're feeling anxiety.
You know what anxiety feels like. We all do. Everyone experiences anxiety in some way or another. It's something that connects all of us together. Why we feel anxiety and what it really is, that may surprise you. Without anxiety, we'd all be in serious trouble. As soon as your brain senses you're in danger, a little piece of it, called the amygdala, kicks in. It gets your body ready to react. That could mean fight, run away, or shut down. It's called the fight, flight, or freeze response. This reaction goes back millions of years to our distant animal ancestors. Animals whose amygdalae were more sensitive to danger were more likely to stay alive and off the menu. Over millions of generations, this developed into the system we all know as anxiety. So you see, anxiety itself is not all bad. But when there's no immediate life or death threat, and your amygdala keeps telling your body that you're in danger, that's when anxiety becomes a problem. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference between getting eaten and public speaking or failing a test. Human society has only existed for a relatively short time. It's messy and complicated and confusing, and our amygdala just haven't had time to catch up. So sometimes, when we're in uncomfortable situations, our brains misread the risk and overreact. Our hearts beat faster and we breathe heavily, pulling more oxygen into our bodies. The muscles in our arms and legs tense up and fill with blood. Our skin perspires to cool us down. This would all be great if we needed to fight or run, but instead, we just feel tense and sweaty. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When things trigger our anxiety, sometimes we try to avoid them, like our ancestors avoiding a predator. But that can cause problems when those triggers are important parts of life, like going to school or meeting new people, things that won't just give up and go away. So how does knowing all this help? Well, it starts with remembering what's really going on. There's nothing physically wrong with you. It's just your amygdala trying to tell you it thinks you're in danger, even if it gets confused about how much danger you're really in. Understanding why we feel anxiety is an important step in learning to manage it.
That video always kind of hits home for kids about what's happening in their body and that it's a legitimate brain function. And so, a lot of times it can be super impactful for them. So the stress vulnerability model is something that we always use to consider really as a hope for change. You'll see on the one side of the teeter-totter there's innate vulnerability, so that might be a family history or changes in life that makes someone a bit more vulnerable to anxiety. And if you add on to that any sort of stressors in their life, big or small, it can really weigh down the teeter-totter. But the good news is that on the other side, you can see that coping skills and learning how to manage, having the support of peers or teachers or family can really tip that teeter-totter and balance things a little bit. So, this is really hopeful for us in knowing that even though if someone may be vulnerable to anxiety or experiencing anxiety, by learning coping skills and having the support of others, they can balance things out a bit more. One of the questions we get a lot is, will my child outgrow anxiety? And so I guess, the short answer is no, because one of the things that we know is avoidance is one of the most common ways that, kids and teens cope with anxiety. And sometimes it's even a common way that we support our children or teens with anxiety. But we know that if avoidance is the way people cope, it just makes anxiety grow bigger and become more solidified as a coping skill, can be really disabling. And so lots of research, lots of counseling strategies have shown that facing fears decreases sensitivity and anxiety. It's just a known fact. And so really the goal is not necessarily curing anxiety. If someone has an overthinking personality, they may always have an overthinking personality, but it's about helping them learn to cope when they get triggered or when that overthinking gets triggered a bit. Obviously, a range of severity of anxiety-related problems. So you'll see on the mild side, kids who may be described as sensitive or shy. That's a larger percentage of the population, so about 8%. And then on the other side, we have severe anxiety problems. So it may be kids who are described as extremely anxious, only 2% of the population, but it's something that's really persistent, has been going on for many, many years. Usually there's some family history. This may be a child who's involved with a doctor, involved with counseling. The important part to remember about whether a student has mild anxiety or severe anxiety is that the strategies are the same. So, they're still focused on the same goals as whether it's mild or severe. We like to show this video because it's real kids talking about how it feels to have anxiety and how they manage it.
I'm 10 years old. 12 years old. 12 years old.
10 years old?
Well, I'm really good at making people laugh.
I'm actually really good at reading.
I could kind of juggle.
Dancing, fishing for a wall to fish.
I'm bored. I'd like to play basketball.
I like to read.
I go to my pool.
Running, biking, swimming.
Something I worry about is my cousin because I don't want him to get bullied.
My family, my future, tests. I don't like the pressure. It just does not feel good.
Being worried feels like frightened or scared or nervous.
Like my heart is beating faster and faster and faster.
Like something's wrong.
I feel like there's butterflies in my stomach.
To relieve stress, I like to talk about it with my mom.
Drink water to just help the process. And then I just calm down.
Breathe in and breathe out. Like, lay down, listen to music, putting my mind on something else.
Cuddle with my cat.
I think that's pretty cool, how they could just calm. Kids should talk about their feelings that are keeping inside of them, or else nothing's gonna happen.
It's okay to feel sad, worried, or anxious from time to time. There are things you can do to work through your emotions and start to feel better. You're not alone. We're here for you. For ways to get support, visit kidshelpphone.ca.
Kids Help Phone is another great resource for kids and parents, just in knowing how to talk about things or coping strategies that might help. And, you know, that video always reminds me that our kids know much more than we might think about how they feel and what will help them. So those kids do such a good job of explaining that. So, okay, how to talk to your child about anxiety is super important, and we wanted to spend a little bit of time giving you some tips, you know, to help you with that. So, one of the things that's important to remember is the goal isn't to eliminate anxiety. So, no matter what you say or do, you may not be able to eradicate those thoughts of anxiety, but it's really about helping your child learn how to cope with it, how to manage it. Obviously, you've heard me say over and over again that avoiding things can make things worse, even though the child may be comfortable with that, and it may feel comfortable to us as parents as well. It's important that we're always positive and realistic when we're talking to kids about their anxiety and setting goals. So not setting, you know, goals too huge, like if a child is struggling with sleeping over at their grandparents' house, going on making a goal of going away to camp for a week might be too unrealistic to start with. And respect their feelings, but don't empower them. So it's important to acknowledge what your child's feeling, but not giving it too much power, not agreeing with it too much, just kind of acknowledging it and then helping them move on. So don't ask leading questions. The more you can be open and let your child explain it, the more kind of accurate description you'll get. Don't reinforce your child's fears. So if they're saying that they're worried about something, you know, it may be obvious, but letting them know, yes, you should be really scared about that. Yes, that is really huge. Even though you think you're kind of joining with them and being supportive, it can make things obviously a lot worse. Help them see that it's important for them to tolerate their anxiety and live through it, not make it totally disappear. Try to keep the anticipatory period short. So this is really important. Some kids who have anxiety need to know everything. But sometimes it's important for us to know that if they're nervous about needles and we know they're getting one at the doctor's appointment, then it's important that they have some warning, but not maybe a week before, because they will really work that up in their minds. Try and think things through with your child. So talking out loud, problem solving out loud, lets them hear kind of how you're doing that. And it also lets you model kind of healthy ways of problem solving or coping. So some steps to talking to your child about anxiety. So the first step is encouraging them to talk or open up about their worries or fears. Sometimes kids do this easily, but sometimes they need a little help. So describing a situation where you've seen them be anxious, even though they may have not noticed that themselves. Describing a time when you yourself have been anxious, or a situation where other children, you've seen them anxious, or you would suspect they could be anxious, or obviously just asking them directly. The next step is teaching your child about anxiety. So describing the symptoms, using some of the videos like the Anxiety Canada video to kind of help them understand what the symptoms are. Using stories, there's tons of stuff on YouTube where there are different storybooks that kind of describe symptoms of anxiety. The next step is to help them recognize their anxiety and how it presents. So the physical feelings they may have, some of the thoughts they may have, and some of the behaviors or actions that could lead to. You see on the screen cognitive behavioral therapy, so CBT. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. CBT is one of the most researched counseling strategies for anxiety. It really focuses on anxious thoughts or depressive thoughts, and really focuses on that connection between what we think leads to what we feel and what we do. And so if we can change anything in this triad, they will all change. So here's a quick video on the negative cycle of anxiety and how the more we worry about something, the bigger problem it can cause for us.
The negative cycle of anxiety. Learning about cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, can help us to understand how we think and feel in different situations. A certain situation might make us feel anxious or low, but there's usually more to it than just those emotions. As well as the emotions, the situation will make us have particular thoughts, engage in certain behaviours, and perhaps experience some unwanted physical sensations. This diagram, sometimes called the hot cross bun model, shows how these four components are all interlinked and connected to each other, and that they may be what keep our feelings of anxiety going. That is to say, they may be maintaining the cycle of anxiety. More often than not, we just notice how situations make us feel emotionally. We notice when we feel shy or nervous in class, or when we're feeling anxious about schoolwork. But let's take a look at how each of the other three components can be impacted when we're in an anxious situation. First, let's focus on our thoughts. Loads of thoughts swirl in our minds when we find ourselves in a challenging situation, or even when we're experiencing something completely new for the first time. These thoughts are often along the lines of, something bad is going to happen and I'm not going to be able to cope. For example, it could be that you're quite scared of public speaking, and when it comes to doing a presentation in class, your thoughts are along the lines of, I'll mess up my speech, the whole class will laugh at me, and I won't be able to handle that. In addition to these thoughts, you might notice physical sensations in your body, such as a faster heart rate, feeling shaky or sweaty, or you might get that strange feeling of butterflies in your stomach. Sometimes these sensations can be quite uncomfortable, but they are just our body's natural biological response to feeling stressed or anxious, and help us in preparing to take action in these situations. In other words, it's our body telling us that we're in danger, when actually we're not really. It's also known as our fight or flight response, which you can learn more about by watching one of our other videos. So, a situation is making us feel anxious, have lots of anxious negative thoughts, and feel quite uncomfortable in our bodies. This then may lead to us changing our behaviour. We do things to help us feel better or to help us cope with the situation. This may even involve avoiding it altogether. While this may be a relief in the short term, it means we never learn to face our fears and never teach ourselves how to tame the anxious feelings. For example, leaving the class just before it's your turn to do that presentation will mean that you don't ever get to find out whether you would have been able to cope with the situation. When it comes to the next time you have to do a presentation in class, your thoughts will be exactly the same. You will probably still think that you'll mess up, that everyone will laugh, and that you won't be able to handle it. The anxious feelings and uncomfortable physical sensations therefore never go away, and the vicious cycle starts to form. What you can hopefully see now is that this vicious cycle of negativity that we're creating is made worse by our negative thoughts and behaviours. Therefore, to change how we feel in these anxiety-provoking situations, we must change how we think and how we behave. This is how we go about breaking out of the vicious cycle, and start forming one that impacts how we think and feel in a more positive way. One of the ways we can do this is through managing our thoughts. But how? By identifying our negative thoughts and then learning how to challenge them. If you would like to learn more about these skills, watch our videos called Identifying Negative Thoughts, Falling into a Thinking Trap, and our other video, Managing Negative Thoughts, Thought Challenge Buster. This video was created by the Tower Hamlets Education Wellbeing Service. Thanks.
So we always kind of focus on the cycle of anxiety because it highlights how avoidance can maintain anxiety rather than manage it. So although it feels great at the time because the person kind of drops that anxiety immediately, it comes back the first time they're faced with that again. And usually most things that we're anxious about happen all the time in our lives. And so we will be triggered again. So let's move on to the Trails group. So Trails to Wellness is a research project that was done by a university in the US. And the idea was to present social emotional groups that counselors could run in the schools. And so one of the things that they found in their research is that these skill building groups that were led by school mental health trained professionals, there was a huge improvement in student engagement and academic performance. So kids just were able to focus more on their work because they were able to manage some of their feelings a little bit better. So some student testimonials, so kids who are a part of the group, you can see on the screen. No surprise that being a part of the group really helped them connect with others, but also learn some coping skills that will help them for all of their lives. So the Trails to Wellness group curriculum here at Durham Catholic, the main purpose is to help students, learn about their anxiety and practice strategies that they can use to cope and manage symptoms of stress. So our group is 10 sessions. It's offered to students who are in grades 3 to 5. We do a combination of psychoeducation. We also have some facilitator-led activities, and each week there's a practice assignment for kids to work on to just reinforce some of the concepts. Every week, parents will receive an email, and the email has content that we talked about, some videos that you may want to review, just so that you're able to support your child, with the work that they're doing. We have a workbook that is sent before the group starts, and it's also emailed, so parents can, download it or use it that way as well. The group is based on CBT, so lots of focus on kind of what we think, how that affects how we feel and what we do. Lots of mindfulness and relaxation activities. We do activities almost every group to give kids a real menu of strategies that they can use to manage their feelings. And then we end on really focusing kids and parents on behavioral activation and exposure. So creating a fear ladder where kids have something that's feared at the top of their ladder, and we help create small steps that they can take to face that fear. Exposure is a super important and powerful part of CBT, and so we spend the last 2 sessions having parents join and working on those ladders together. One of the things we ask you to consider is just if the timing is right for your family. So we are asking kids to come for 10 weeks. We know that life is busy and there's lots of activities. And so, while a student may miss a group due to illness, each group builds on the last group. So missing too many of them just wouldn't allow your child to get the most out of the group. We need parents to be available. So because it's a virtual group, we do need parents home, for safety reasons, but also to help if there are any technological glitches that kids need help with. If there's a lot of complex issues that your family is facing, it may not be the best time for the group, and that's okay. We've offered it a couple of times a year for many years now. So if you miss this time, there's always time to catch up later. What's next? So if you're listening to this presentation and it really sounds like your child, if you're hearing about the group and really interested in having your child be a part of it, the first thing we would ask you to do is ask your child about that. You can show them some of the videos. You can talk to them about what we shared with you in this information session, and just ask them if they'd be willing to join a group for this reason and with a group of other children. You're going to receive a link for a phone screening. We offer the opportunity to speak to parents about the group, but also to just get a sense of your child and make sure the group would be a good fit. So you'll choose a screening time that works for you. There'll be a number of them that you can choose from. Screenings take about a half an hour. And then at the end of the screening, you'll usually have a sense about whether the group will be a fit. And if the group is not a fit, we always provide other strategies or resources. When you have been accepted into the group, you'll receive a forms survey that's sent to you that is your consent. So once you've completed that form and sent it back to us, then you'll receive the link for the group. We wanted to just take a second to talk about anxiety and, kids who have been diagnosed with autism or autism spectrum disorder. So we know that for students with ASD, mental health problems are quite common. About 40% of students or of children who are on the spectrum also have a co-occurring anxiety disorder. And CBT is a super beneficial strategy, but just needs modifications. So we know that there's lots of language, there's lots of abstract thinking as a part of CBT. And for students on the spectrum, that can be a challenge for them. And so usually a CBT group for kids with ASD needs to be quite slowed down, very repetitive, and with a really high social component to it, because we know that that can be a struggle. So we do know that our group, well, we know that our group is amazing, but we also know that it doesn't truly address some of the needs of students with ASD. So we'd still welcome you to sign up for a phone screening, and we can support you to connect with other resources if the group is not the best fit. So just some group logistics. The group is held virtually, so it's on a Teams platform. Like I mentioned before, parents are expected to support their child to log in and be available during the sessions in case of an emergency. You'll get a weekly email so you can support their learning. And the group is offered as a live event, so names and videos will be used. Now some community resources. If you're hearing this and it just doesn't seem like the right time, there are lots of other resources out there that you could consider. You can see on the screen, these are all agencies in our community, so in the Durham community. So Caria is a health center that has sites in Ajax, Pickering, Whitby, Oshawa. They provide lots of health services, but also some counseling and group supports. Kinark Children and Youth Services. You can see the number there for central intake. Kinark does central intake for a number of mental health agencies in our community. So when you call that central intake number, you'll book an appointment and they will support you through the intake process and help you be connected with the agency that makes the most sense. Catholic Family Services is an agency in our community that provides individual, family, couples counseling, a great resource if you're looking to connect in that way. And then also you can see the crisis number on the screen. So that is obviously something that you can reach out to in crisis to ask for support or suggestions. This deserves its own slide because we're super excited about our social work access line. So this is a Durham Catholic District School Board initiative. The social work access line is obviously supported by social workers. So when you call, you will end up leaving a message, or if you complete the online form, it isn't an immediate crisis support, but you will end up receiving a call from a social worker to ask more information about what you need and connect you with supports. So just super important that not a crisis line, not monitored 24/7, but just a way for you to access a social work consultation without having to go through your child's school. And finally, some apps. There are amazing apps out there, and apps seem to be the way things are going. And so I wanted to just put some apps up there that can be super helpful to get your child started on. So Thinkful, Calm, Breathe, those are all mindfulness and relaxation apps. And so they have guided meditations, guided activities that you can use just to kind of focus on being present and relaxing your mind and body. SAM, Clear Fear, My Thought Journal, and Mindshift are all CBT-based apps. Mindshift is actually created by Anxiety Canada, so that's one that I use all the time with my students because it's very, very well done. And all of these apps kind of support kids to notice their anxiety, track it, get in touch with their thoughts, and work on challenging them. So take a peek at any of these apps. I'm sure they'll be very, very helpful for you.